The soil from my father's funeral was still clinging to my shoes when Victoria slipped the document across the mahogany table. She didn't even wait for me to remove my black mourning veil. It was an official eviction notice. 30 days to leave the property. Victoria sat there sipping an expensive Cabernet from a crystal goblet, wearing my deceased mother's diamond necklace like a war trophy. "You are a remnant of a history I'm erasing," she said, her voice smooth as venom. I looked at the paper, then back at her. She believed she had triumphed. She was mistaken. Before we continue, drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from and what time it is in your location right now. I'd really love to know who's part of our growing community. To the outside world, Victoria was the devoted second wife who cared for my father, Marcus, through his final painful year. In truth, she was a parasite who had finally destroyed her host. For the last 12 months, she had methodically isolated him in the east wing of the Riverside Manor, dismissing the nurses I employed and replacing them with staff who reported only to her. She controlled his telephone, his visitors, and his pain medication. She performed the role of the grieving lady of the estate flawlessly, wearing expensive designer outfits to doctor appointments while I was outside in the freezing weather, tending vines until my hands bled raw. That was our dynamic. Victoria managed the illusion of prosperity. I managed the actual creation of it. I was 24 years old, a junior viticulturist, and the only person on this property who could distinguish between a Pinot Noir and a Merlot grape. While Victoria was busy selling off my father's possessions to finance her failed society lifestyle, I was the invisible force in the fermentation cellars, monitoring sugar levels at 3 in the morning, dealing with distributors, and keeping the Riverside label alive. What happens next will shock you. But first, let me explain why I stayed. People constantly question me about why I remained. Why, after turning 18, didn't I simply pack my belongings and abandon them to their dysfunction? They labeled me weak. They claimed I had a victim mentality, but they failed to grasp the invisible chain binding a survivor. I didn't stay because I feared Victoria. I stayed because this estate wasn't merely real estate to me. It was history. It was my mother's sweat in the earth and my father's legacy on the gate. Leaving would have been an acknowledgement that Victoria owned this place, and I refused to grant her that satisfaction. I wasn't a victim trapped in a mansion. I was a guardian protecting a heritage. I endured the insults, the cold meals, and the way she looked at me like I was a stain on her expensive carpet because I understood that as long as I remained here, the vines would survive. I had been the silent operator, the keeper of the flame, waiting for the winds to shift. But as I stared at that eviction notice, realizing she intended to remove me before my father's body was even cold, I realized my silence had reached its expiration date. Victoria thought she was pruning a dead branch. She didn't realize she was cutting into the roots of a poisonous plant she knew nothing about. She wanted a battle for the estate. Fine, but she had forgotten one crucial thing. I knew where the secrets were buried, and I knew precisely which lever to pull to bring the entire house crashing down on top of her. Victoria didn't wait for the 30 days to expire. She began erasing my father immediately. The morning after she served me the notice, the sound of a heavy van door pulled me onto the porch. A luxury consignment truck was idling in the driveway. I watched from the kitchen window as 2 men in white gloves carried out my father's vintage leather armchairs, his collection of first-edition nautical maps, and the hand-carved desk where he had signed the original property deed. Victoria stood on the porch, pointing and directing, a glass of champagne in her hand at 10 in the morning. She was liquidating his memory to fund her future. You won't believe what I did next. I walked outside. "What are you doing?" I asked, my voice calm but strained. "Those aren't yours to sell." Victoria laughed, a brittle, high-pitched sound. "Everything is mine to sell, darling. I'm the surviving spouse. You're just a tenant overstaying your welcome. I'm simply clearing out the clutter. We need to make space for the new vision." The new vision involved transforming the Riverside Manor estate into a tacky event venue. Later that afternoon, a developer arrived. He was a slick man in an inexpensive suit who looked at the vines like they were weeds. I heard Victoria explaining her plans. She wanted to bulldoze the south acreage, the oldest Pinot Noir vines in the county, to install a concrete parking lot and a wedding pavilion. Wine is such messy work, she said, wrinkling her nose. It's all mud and insects. Events are where the real profit is. We'll keep a decorative row of grapes for photographs, but the rest can go. I stood there listening to her casual destruction of 70 years of cultivation, and something inside me hardened into steel. This wasn't just about inheritance anymore. This was about preventing her from destroying something irreplaceable. That night, I made my decision. Victoria wanted to play games with my family's legacy? Fine. But she had made one fatal miscalculation. She assumed my father was a sentimental fool who left everything to his young wife out of affection. She was wrong. My father, Marcus, had been many things: a distant parent, a harsh employer, but he was never a fool. And in the final months of his life, when Victoria thought she had him completely under her control, isolated and medicated, he had done something she never anticipated. He had called his attorney, Dr. Harrison Richards, to the estate under the pretense of updating minor estate details. What he actually did was activate a legal mechanism so elegantly vicious that even I had been unaware of its existence until after the funeral. The secret my father left behind would change everything. It was called a poison pill clause, a conditional inheritance structure buried deep in the trust documents. The concept was simple but devastating. Victoria had been granted the estate, the accounts, and a substantial monthly allowance, but only under one specific condition. She could never attempt to sell the property or any portion of its land during her lifetime. If she tried, if she even entertained offers or signed preliminary agreements, the entire inheritance would immediately and irrevocably transfer to me. Not just the estate. Everything. The bank accounts, the investments, even the jewelry she wore. My father had built a trap, and all I had to do was wait for her to step into it. I spent the next week in a state of controlled tension, watching Victoria finalize her plans with a developer. She hired architects to design the wedding pavilion. She met with landscapers to discuss removing the vines. She even commissioned promotional materials, glossy brochures showing computer-generated images of what Riverside Event Center would look like. She was so confident, so certain that my father's estate was hers to do with as she pleased. Meanwhile, I kept my head down and worked the vines. I let her believe I was defeated, packing my belongings in resignation. I even played the part of the bitter, powerless daughter, making snide comments that she could dismiss with a wave of her hand. But privately, I was in contact with Dr. Richards, my father's attorney, documenting every move she made. Every meeting with the developer, every signed contract, every architectural drawing was a nail in her coffin. The real estate agent she hired was a woman named Patricia Morrison, a high-powered broker who specialized in luxury conversions. Patricia had no idea what she was walking into. When she arrived at the estate for the final signing meeting, 3 weeks after my father's funeral, she brought a folder full of preliminary purchase agreements, zoning variance applications, and environmental impact waivers. Victoria had set the meeting in the formal dining room, the same room where she had served me the eviction notice. This was the moment I had been waiting for. I arrived exactly on time, carrying a leather portfolio. Victoria barely glanced at me. "You can leave," she said dismissively. "This doesn't concern you anymore." "Actually," I said, taking a seat, "it concerns me more than anyone." Patricia looked confused. Victoria's expression flickered with irritation. "What are you talking about?" "I'm talking about the trust," I said calmly, "and the conditions attached to your inheritance." Victoria's face went pale, but she recovered quickly. "There are no conditions. Marcus left me this estate free and clear. His attorney confirmed it. Dr. Richards confirmed that you inherited the estate." I agreed. "But did he explain the poison pill clause?" The room went silent. Patricia glanced between us, her professional smile faltering. "What clause?" Victoria's voice was sharp now, defensive. I opened my portfolio and slid a single sheet of paper across the table. It was a formal notification from Dr. Richards's office outlining the activation of the poison pill clause. Victoria glanced at it, scoffed, and then began to read. I watched her face. It was a fascinating study in the anatomy of a downfall. First confusion, then disbelief, and finally a pale, shaking terror. The silence in the room stretched until it was almost deafening. The real estate agent looked between us, sensing the shift in atmospheric pressure. "This is a joke," Victoria whispered. Her hands were trembling so hard the paper rattled against the table. "This isn't legal. He wouldn't do this to me." "He did," I said. "He knew exactly who you were. He knew you would try to sell this place before the flowers on his grave had wilted. So he made sure that if you tried, you would lose everything. The stipend, the allowance, the car. It's all gone, Victoria. You breached the contract. You evicted yourself." She stood up, knocking her chair over. "You little witch," she screamed, her composure shattering. "I was his wife. I nursed him. I deserve this money. What happened next was the sweetest justice." "You deserve nothing," I replied, not raising my voice. "You isolated a dying man. You abused his daughter. You tried to destroy his legacy for a quick payout. You gambled on his weakness, but you forgot to account for his intelligence." I stood up. My shadow fell across her paperwork like a gavel stroke. "You gave me 30 days to get out of my own home. The trust gives you 0, but I'm not unreasonable. I'll give you until the locksmith arrives. That's about 45 minutes. Victoria looked at the real estate agent, desperate for an ally, but the woman was already packing her bag, clearly wanting no part of this disaster. Victoria turned back to me, her eyes wild. "I'm not leaving. You can't make me." "Actually, I can," I said. "I've already called the sheriff. He's on his way to remove a trespasser. And since you just voided your own prenuptial agreement, I suggest you start packing whatever you can carry. The Louis Vuitton bags you bought with the operating budget might be all you have left." The sheriff arrived 10 minutes later. He didn't need to use force, but his presence was enough. Victoria screamed about fairness, about her sacrifice, about how she had given everything to a man who betrayed her. But as she dragged her designer luggage down the gravel driveway, her heels sinking into the dirt she despised, she looked small. The grandeur was gone. She was just a woman who had gambled on greed and lost. I watched her car disappear down the long, winding road. When the taillights faded, the silence returned. It was different this time. It wasn't the tense, suffocating silence of walking on eggshells. It was deep and heavy, like the earth after a storm. I called the locksmith, changed every lock in the house, and then I walked out to the vineyard. The transformation had just begun. The sun was setting, casting long, golden shadows across the rows of vines. I walked to the edge of the south acreage, the place Victoria had wanted to pave over. The soil was cold and rich under my boots. I could feel the life in it, the dormant energy waiting for spring. The invisible chain that had bound me to this place for so long, the fear that if I left, it would die, was gone. It was replaced by a different weight, the weight of ownership, the weight of responsibility. But this was a weight I chose to carry. I had brought a bottle with me, one of the 1998 vintages from the cellar. I didn't drink it. Instead, I pulled the cork and poured the dark ruby liquid onto the ground at the base of the oldest vine, a libation for the ghosts. For my mother, who planted this seed, and for my father, who watered it with his silence, so it could survive the drought. They say that revenge is a dish best served cold. But I disagree. The best revenge isn't about destruction. It's about preservation. It's about standing in the wreckage of someone else's greed and realizing that you are the one holding the seeds of the future. Victoria wanted to erase the past to build a monument to herself. I saved the past to build a future for this land. That is the justice of the survivor. We don't just cut down the weeds. We plant something stronger in their place. I looked out over the valley, my valley, and took a deep breath of the cold air. The war was over. The work was just beginning. And for the first time in my life, I was ready for the harvest. But my story doesn't end here. What I discovered in the weeks that followed changed everything I thought I knew. In the months after Victoria's departure, I began the real work of restoration. I rehired the nurses she had dismissed, not for my father, who was gone, but to interview them about what they had witnessed during his final year. Their testimonies painted a picture even darker than I had imagined. Victoria hadn't just isolated him. She had been systematically increasing his pain medication while decreasing his lucidity, all while presenting herself as his devoted caregiver. I found journals in my father's study, hidden in a locked drawer I discovered while clearing out the East Wing. In his shaking handwriting, he had documented everything. Every conversation with Victoria about selling the land. Every threat she made about cutting me out entirely. Every moment of clarity when he realized what she truly was. He had been more aware than any of us knew, and he had been planning his revenge long before he died. The poison pill clause wasn't his only gift to me. Buried in the trust documents was a second provision, a fund he had set aside specifically for estate improvements, accessible only after Victoria's removal. It was enough to modernize the winery, upgrade the equipment, and expand our distribution. My father, in his final act, had given me not just the land, but the tools to make it thrive. Today, 5 years later, Riverside Manor produces some of the finest wines in the region. The South Acreage Victoria wanted to destroy now yields our premium reserve Pinot Noir, which won a gold medal at the International Wine Competition last year. I've turned the East Wing, where my father spent his final days, into a tasting room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the valley. Sometimes visitors ask about the woman in the old photographs, the elegant blonde who appears in pictures from the estate's recent past. I tell them she was a brief chapter in a much longer story, a cautionary tale about the difference between owning something and understanding its value. So tell me, have you ever had to stay silent to win a bigger war? Have you ever had to protect something precious from someone who couldn't see its value? Drop your story in the comments below. I read every single one. And if this story resonated with you, please hit that subscribe button and let me know your thoughts in the comments. What would you have done in my situation? Let me know below. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next story.